Here we go. Hey, everybody, it is Gretchen, and it is great to see you. So thank you for joining us. This is the Just Gotta Laugh Book Club, and we have a great selection tonight. I'm so thrilled to have her here. So Martha Waters, who you can see on your screen, is joining us. And I think I, said in a lot of my posts that as soon as I saw historical rom-com, particularly like Jane Austen-esque, I was like, I need that. Then even on top of it, once I started researching Martha, I realized we share the same agency. We have the same literary agency, so that opened even more doors for me. So that made it easy. So I will go into more introductions in a second, but I want to make sure that everybody's hearing me and seeing me. Cousin Matthew is here. Cousin Matthew makes it every week. Woohoo! He's here. So bingo card holders, you can mark your square for Cousin Matthew being here. And we're going to run this the same as we always do. I'm going to start off the conversation with Martha, and you can ask your questions, and I will get to them as we get to them. Renee is here. One of the things, Martha, is we always have people like from all over the United States and a couple international from time to time. It's really, really fun. Okay, let's do the housekeeping as we always do. Great weeks coming up. So next week, we are going to have, actually, I think another root literary author, Kelly Harms, is going to be here. You may have known her from all of her previous books, including The Overdue Life of Amy Byler, which was hysterical. There are scenes in that book that I still can't get out of my head. But she has a new book that came out last week. And so we're going to talk about that one. It's called The Bright Side of Going Dark. And if you haven't picked it up yet, pick it up. And you should pick it up from the bookstore that we are shouting out tonight, Flyleaf Books, one of Martha's favorites, right there in Chapel Hill. Are they there in Chapel Hill, right? Yeah. Okay. Karen is here and Emily is here. Hello. We're waving back at everybody. It's great to see you. So I posted Flyleaf Books website in the Facebook. The link is on Facebook, so feel free to support them. So we've got Kelly Harms next week. And then the following week, tell all your friends, especially all your Minnesota friends or your beer drinking friends. We've got J. Ryan Straddle with the Lager Queen of Minnesota. J. Ryan's going to be joining me, and that'll be fun. We've done events together before, and he is just, he's really fun in conversation. And that book is charming as heck. And it's beautifully written. He's one of those writers that I'm like, dang it, I'm never going to be that talented. But he's a wonderful person and deserves every success that he has earned. So he's going to be joining me. I'm still working on June 9th and June 16th. I have things in the works, but nothing that I can announce yet. So that is it. Again, a few more shout outs. If you have books that you want me to cover or authors that you want me to invite, send me a message, put it in the comments. I'm happy to do so. Also, we have the Just Gotta Laugh Book Club discussion group. If you want to join that, just click on the request button and I will admit you. And I haven't been very good at getting conversation going on there, so that's on me. I apologize. That's not one of my skills. So I will own up to it right now. But I do have a skill. Oh, Laura's here. Good to see you, Laura, from the wild, wild west of Wisconsin these days. I do have one of the great pleasures and skills of finding wonderful books and also having a job where I remember when I signed with my agent, she actually said to me, Gretchen, it is now your job to read. And that was like life-changing for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I never have to feel guilty about reading again, because it's always been a little bit of a guilty pleasure for me because I grew up with wonderful parents, but they were workers, you work, you get stuff done. So, and as a part of that new wonderful job profession that I'm in, I have the chance to introduce authors like Martha Waters. So, Martha, welcome. I can see that in North Carolina, it is getting dark. It is Eastern time.
Yeah, and it's like been monsooning here like all day because of this weird tropical storm thing that's coming up the coast. So it's darker than it actually is.
So we are here. I'm going to pull it up. I have it on my this one I read on my e-reader. To have and to hoax. So there it is. You have the paperback.
I just keep it on my coffee table so I can stare at it at all times, basically.
Where you have that surreal experience where you're like, that's my name on the book. And I know what's inside of it. Yeah, it never goes away either. That's the good thing. Actually, with this book, I had a really unique experience because I actually read it and switched back and forth to the audiobook, and that was really fun. Your audiobook narrators were really good. And I'm just going to kick off. Oh, by Laura's request, I have to remember to give a synopsis of the book. Now, I'm going to not give any spoilers away, but you keep me honest, Martha. Tell me if I miss anything significant. But the story is set, it's very like Jane Austen-esque timeline. It's set in London and the countryside in England. And it's a couple who gets married basically immediately. They're engaged on their first encounter and they get married. And the book opens 5 years into their marriage. And 4 years after they have a blowout fight and basically haven't spoken to each other since. So they start their marriage strong for 1 year, have a blowout fight, and then everything falls apart. And as the book opens, Violet, the matriarch, well, the main character, is at home and receives notice that her husband has been injured on the polo field, correct? Is that correct?
He's in a riding accident. He was trying to break in a horse and
that's right. It's a riding accident. Okay, that's right. And so she goes rushing to his aid. And when she arrives, not only is he fine, but he's disappointed to see her. And she gets so upset that she then she creates a whole ruse trying to get him to feel as sympathetic about how she felt upon not only discovering that he was fine, but that he wasn't excited to see her after she comes rushing to his aid, that she fakes having consumption. So the book
is really unhinged whenever I have to actually describe the plot of this book to anyone.
So the book unravels from there because they're each onto each other, and like a true British comedy, it gets more and more and more tightly wound as they're both trying to one up each other and win this silent battle of sorts. And at the end, you're left, I'm not going to tell you what the ending is, but you have to get all the way to the end to figure out not only what is this big gigantic fight that they had at year one, and also will they resolve their differences or will they not? So, you know, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I took some notes here, and I knew that I had to read this when I saw the description was a rom-com for Jane Austen fans. And so, and I know in having read a little bit of biographical information about you, one of the things that you thank your parents for, in fact, it may even be at the beginning of the book, is that they took you to Jane Austen's house when you were young. And so just tell us a little bit about the seed for this book and how you were even drawn to this idea in the first place.
Yeah, so I was having a lifelong Anglophile, and I 100% blame my parents for this, for just, I mean, there's a lot of really great British children's books out there, and they pretty much like raised me on those. And
I should say that you are actually a children's librarian. You have your master's degree in library science, you're a children's librarian professionally right there in Chapel Hill, right?
Yep, but book is not for children. It was like
no, it's not.
when I got my book deal, people were like, "Oh, is it a kid's book?" And I was like, "Oh, no, you do not let your children read this, please." I'm a lifelong Anglophile, and my parents always encouraged this. I spent my childhood, reading like Beatrix Potter, and then as I got older, I was of the Harry Potter generation, and I just read a lot of British lit. And then when I was middle school age, I kind of aged into Jane Austen. So I read all of Jane Austen in middle school and early high school. When I was in high school, my parents took me to England, and we specifically went to the town where Jane Austen's house is for no other reason but that I could
to see the house.
Yeah, which those are some good parents right there. But yeah, and so I kind of always wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, like so many people who write. And I always envisioned myself writing for kids and teens, actually, until I started writing this book. But I always knew I wanted to write something set in England. And when I was in library school, I took a class on popular materials where we read a different popular genre each week, and we did romance one week. And so I started reading a lot of Regency romances after I read one romance for that week in class and totally fell in love with it. So about around the time, a little after I finished my master's degree, I got the idea to start writing a Regency romance, but I wanted it to be very funny. And I wanted, I've always kind of been obsessed with consumption being the most romantic way to die. And so
so I don't read Regency romance typically. I mean, I'm drawn to the rom-com aspect of this. So is dying of consumption a big theme in these typically?
No, it's not. I got that from reading Anne of the Island, the third Anne of Green Gables book, when I was a kid. I read it over and over and over again, and someone dies of consumption in that book, and it's very romantic because she's very beautiful and had always had a lot of suitors. But then it's very tragic because she's dying and she's finally found the one man that she wants to marry, but it's too late because she's gonna die. But Anne goes to visit her on her deathbed, and it's very glamorous. She's more beautiful than she's ever been before, and it's her adoring suitor. Ever since I was in middle school, I've had this understanding that yes, if you're going to die, obviously consumption is the way you want to go. Which I was much older when I learned that consumption was tuberculosis, so it's actually not at all a romantic way to die. You just cough up blood and
it's an awful disease, yeah.
But no, so yes, I would say a lot of influences went into this. The Anglophilia, the love of Regencies in general are a lot of them are pretty funny. So there is a big tradition of humor in the Regency genre, and it's been nice. I think in the past few years, since contemporary rom-coms have become so popular, there's more of an appetite than ever for funny historical rom-coms as well, which served me well because that's what I wanted to write. And then yes, my obsession with consumption was the other seed.
Your obsession with consumption.
It's totally normal.
I know we have a couple nurses on. Has anybody ever said to you that before our nurses that someone has an obsession with consumption? And have you ever treated consumption, aka tuberculosis?
So it's funny because someone in my high school had not consumption, tuberculosis, and was in the hospital, and I think that was the point where I realized that it was the same thing as consumption, and it was honestly very disappointing for 17-year-old me. I was like, oh, that's not fun.
There was a period where there was an outbreak of tuberculosis, and my friend's dad got it. Yeah. So tell us a little bit I know that you did the good author thing and began writing in a genre that you were already steeped in, that you were already a fan of, but one of the things that amazes me about, I often say this to the writers who are either on this or that I know personally who write historical fiction, is research is not one of my strong suits. Just isn't. I don't hold on to those details. And then you layer onto it an era like this where I don't know. So how do you go about researching a book like this so that you get everything right, from the mannerisms to that? We're going to go into the subtlety of the humor later in this, but you did it brilliantly. So how did you go about that?
So I think that writing Regencies is easier than writing a lot of other types of historical fiction and period pieces because it's such a well-established subgenre of romance, and it feels very familiar to consumers, I think, because of Jane Austen and 5,000 different, BBC adaptations of things and stuff.
Well, and even recently with Downton Abbey and
yeah, exactly.
the reboot of Upstairs, Downstairs. Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's nice and that people are kind of coming into it with some knowledge of the time period already. So you don't feel like you have to do the thing you do if you're writing something set in a more obscure time period to kind of like set the scene and explain what's like happening at that moment in history, because people already know. But the flip side of that is that people are going to notice if you make a mistake as well.
Right. Yeah.
But so I was a British history major in undergrad. So I also get like, just because I love England. So I definitely came into it with some pre-existing knowledge and just from kind of reading widely in the genre and getting a feel for how much historical detail seemed to be the standard. I kind of knew what I wanted to do going in. So I actually wrote a first draft, not doing any research. And then at that point, I didn't know what I didn't know, like what the details were that I needed to make it feel right. So I wrote the first draft, just focused on the characters and the plot and everything. And then just had like highlighter yellow all over the document, like where I needed to add stuff in. And at that point, I started reading some books. There's actually a bunch of Regency blogs out there, which are really, really helpful. If you just have some random question, like what food would be served at a dinner party in 1817, there's a blog that will answer that question.
Oh, there you go.
But there's actually a really good book I read called Georgette Hare's Regency World. And so it's really great for anyone who wants to write a Regency romance because it's really specific to kind of the aristocracy. So all the things that you need to know if you're writing about aristocrats in the Regency. How many servants they would have in their London house versus in their country house, like what the currency meant, like what average wages for different servants would be, what fabrics a dress would be made out of in the morning versus in the evening, how many times you would change clothes a day, all the things like that, which I think are really just the little details that make a book feel right. And
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know that, I have been saying to people since the book came out, I was not striving to write a completely historically accurate book, because if I was, then my hero would have been the sexist douchebag and no one wants to read about that. But you just want it to have little details that make it feel right. And because if it feels too modern or like there are too many things you get wrong, then it's going to be distracting, especially to readers who read really widely about the Regency, because they know their stuff and they'll call you out on it if you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you, okay, so you get the historical details, but one of the things I really thought was so funny about this novel was particularly Violet. She just does not suffer fools. And the humor in this book is so typically British. Yeah, I'm an Anglophile as well, and I'm a huge British comedy fan. I was raised by a British comedy fan, stayed a British comedy fan. And so I was as I was reading this, it was very resonant because the humor is equal parts body and subtle and cutting. When it's subtle, it's very cutting and it's very to the point and it's easily missed, I think, in British comedy, or else it's just over the top body. So how did you master that subtlety? Do you think reading so much of the Regencies tuned your ear to it, or where do you think that came from? And was it something you had to work through?
No, the comedy aspect is the part of the book that I think came like the easiest to me. All the banter and stuff, like that's what I like writing, and that's what is the most fun to write, and that I have to then go back and edit myself kind of because I get too indulgent and I'm like right to 10-page scene where they're just sitting around like and the jokes are flying. Yeah, I think it's just being sort of steeped in British media for my entire life, honestly. Just kind of developed, because it's very much my sense of humor. My friends who have read the book keep talking about how much it like they just hear me in the book and the jokes and stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to say a lifetime of British books and TV shows has made British humor seem very natural to me, to the point that a lot of American humor seems like too over the top and like obvious and like unsubtle to me a lot of the time. Like I kind of prefer British humor. So
yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely differences in style. So I want to open this up a little bit. I have been throwing questions at Martha. If you guys have questions, throw them into the comments. I would love to hear what you thought of the book, or, you know, I want to get into favorite characters. I will wait to tell you who my favorite character was, because it may not be who you expect, but did you have a favorite or a favorite to write?
So it's interesting in that everyone seems to really love a lot of the minor characters, which I do too, but I did not really intend for them to play as big of a role in the book as they ultimately, I mean, I wanted them to have friends because I needed someone to be like, you guys are acting crazy, but I really didn't intend for them to be as major as they are. They kind of just walked into the scenes and like took over. So I think my favorite ones to write are probably Diana and Jeremy, just because they, especially when they're together, they play off of each other so well. My unexpected other favorite was Sophie, who did not exist in the first draft of this book. She was a different character because she just existed for plot purposes, because I needed to have a character that James was going to try to pretend to seduce, basically. And the way it was happened in the first draft, it just wasn't working at all. So I replaced it with her character instead, and then she totally like took on a life of her own. And I've had several readers tell me how much they love her and really want to like a story for her. And I'm like, well, I have not written one, but like duly noted.
That's great though, when the characters pop off the page and people want more. That's absolutely terrific. And I know that you are working on another book, not necessarily a sequel, but we'll talk about that right before we wrap up. Can you guess who my favorite character was? Well, actually, who do people tend to call out as favorites? Do readers tend to call out?
I would say it's a tie right now. I mean, in my very unscientific, like not keeping any tally of this, I would say it's a tie between Diana and Wes, James' brother Wes. Those are the two that everyone says are their favorites. But I would say at some
I can see that.
At some point, I would say almost every character I've had at least one or two people say is their favorite. So there does seem to be, the love gets spread around, but
the love gets spread around. That's good. That's good. Can you guess who mine was? It's not you. I don't know if you've heard this one a lot. If I love subtle British humor.
I don't know. I don't think of my characters as being that subtle.
Wooten was my favorite. The Wooten, if you haven't read the book, Wooten is the butler.
Okay, that is a first. I have yet to have anyone tell me that Wooten is their favorite, which is, I'm glad that he's getting some love. That's a character I had to rename because the name I had given him in the first few drafts, I had not realized this when I named him, but it was the same name as a building on UNC's campus here in Chapel Hill, which I was I think, oh, that's fine, no big deal. And then I realized that building is named after someone who was in the KKK, and they recently had to rename it. So I was like, oh my gosh.
I can't venerate that.
Like, they hadn't renamed it when I was an undergrad there, so I walked past it with the old KKK name like all the time, and just must have internalized it. And so I accidentally named a character after a Klansman. And in draft 5, I realized it, and I renamed him Wooten, which I thought sounded more British. So,
well, at least you caught it.
Yeah, close call there.
Yeah, no, I loved Wooten. Just, I mean, he's not the most well-rounded character, but it just made me laugh because every time he's the butler, and every time he walks on scene, he just has this choice. Butlers, you know, being writers, we're observers. You know, we watch the world around us, and these random events get stuck in our heads, and we're not even aware that they stick in our heads until, like, just today, I was working out a plot point, and something from years ago popped into my head, and it was applicable to this moment. And so I think I resonate with him because he's an observer, and he speaks with such few words, but they're always choice and to the point. And I found myself laughing almost every time he walked in because he would have just
feel bad for him that he's employed by these crazy people and he's having to read all of this.
Yes, plus I did love the name Wooten. It just seemed so, it seems
like a butler name.
So like, butler-esque.
Yes, it just
really
seems
did.
like the name of a butler.
It seemed very, very Butler-esque. Okay. Do people, one of the things that I wonder about books like this is, ever since the Twilight team, Jacob versus team, why am I blanking? Edward. Anytime there's like a relationship split like this, maybe it predates Twilight. I have no idea, but do you find fans grabbing on to the Team Violet versus Team James dynamic?
It's funny because I was conscious of that while I was writing, because I was worried. I didn't want to make one of them more sympathetic than the other, and I was worried that people were going to end up on Team James because Violet is the one who comes up with the ruse of pretending to be dying, which is bad. Not a good. Don't recommend as a thing you should do to your romantic partner or anyone. So I was very conscious of that, but so I tried very hard to keep them very like on a level playing field. Like I wanted James to figure out what she was doing very quickly, and then for him to kind of retaliate so that it would like negate that possibility.
Yeah.
Just because they're both behaving so immaturely, and part of the reason they both are behaving so maturely is because I needed to make sure that they were equally sympathetic and equally unsympathetic at the same time. And that's where I feel like the reader is more like Team Diana and Emily, who are over the side being like, what are you doing? Why don't you just talk to each other? Like I feel like the thing that a lot of people are identifying with the most is the friends who are kind of there on the sidelines being like,
the bystanders.
What are you doing?
I actually, as I was reading, you should never read the reviews of your book as an author, but I was reading the reviews. And they're good. Don't worry, they're good. But I read one reader who said something very similar. She was like, I wanted to take these two people and smack their heads together the whole book because they're being so irrational and so childish. And that evolves over the course of the book, but that's what it must have. I can see how people would relate to the friends. Plus, we all have had friends like that. I can think of two very specific friends in college that we watched nothing but them fighting and almost breaking up and then getting back together and then reuniting. And it was just like, I think they thrived on the drama. Do you think this couple thrives on the drama?
So I actually don't, just because James is not that dramatic of a person, I would say. Like, he's just trying to live his life and be silently resentful of his father and like go along.
That's a form of drama, don't you think? I mean, British drama.
Yeah, that's true.
Stiff upper lip drama.
But I think their thing is not so much that they thrive off of drama, though. I mean, like, Lord knows, like everyone, like you said, everyone knows that couple that thrives off of the drama, especially when you're younger. Yeah. But I think their thing is that they're young and they're both really bad at relationships, because when you're in England in 1817, you don't get to have a bunch of like romantic history before you get married, because that's not. Oh, sorry, my cat is flinging herself into a cardboard box.
That's okay. We're animal friendly.
So they don't have any experience to draw on, and the fact that both of them have so much strained relationships with their parents means they don't have like good examples of healthy relationships to kind of model their own marriage off of.
That's true. That's true. And Violet's mother is a piece of work. Oh,
isn't she a delight?
She's a piece of work. If you haven't gone to read the book yet, you're just, I mean, I love lighthearted books like this that you can relate to just across universal human themes. I did not have a piece of work as a mother. I had a great mom, but we've all met people like this in our lives, and you can delight in them crossing your path for just a short while.
My mother is deeply paranoid that people are going to read the book and think that I based Violet's mother off of her. Like, she's obsessed with it. I keep being like, Mom, no one thinks that. And she's like, they do. And I'm like, well, no one who knows you thinks that. And she's like, but most people who read your book don't know me. And I'm like, but people don't automatically assume that like an author is taking everything about their life and putting it in the book. And she's like, but some people will.
Okay, now that's getting a little dramatic.
Yeah, no, she will not let it go. She first read the book in October when I got my ARCs, and so we're like 7 months from then, and she is still complaining.
She's so worried.
People are going to think that Violet's mom is based off of her, which, for the record, she is not. I love my mother, and we get along very well. Though I would say less well now that I've had to have this conversation with her
so many times. So many times. Oh yeah, my last book featured an overbearing, just obnoxious mother, and thankfully my mom knew right away it wasn't her. She's like, well, I'm glad that wasn't me. Although, you know, I don't think that a person who's that obnoxious would recognize themselves in that character, but it wasn't my mother. It wasn't my mother. So we are to the point where we're starting to wrap up. So if anybody has questions or comments for Martha, definitely drop them in. Here's your chance. But Martha, I have 2 questions. So tell us what's coming up next, because I know you're working on something else. And then before you go, I want you to be able to tell everybody where to find you on social media.
Cool. So up next, coming in spring 2021, is To Love and to Loathe, which is a either, depending on who you're asking, it's a companion or a linked standalone. So it's set in the world of To Have and to Hoax. It's set pretty soon after the main action of To Have and to Hoax ends. You could read it independently, though I think people who've read the first one will enjoy it more. But it's about Violet's best friend Diana and James's best friend Jeremy.
Oh, it is.
I would describe as having a sort of Ron and Hermione-esque from Harry Potter relationship of like they're friends, but they just are at each other's throats constantly. And so the whole book takes place out in the countryside at Jeremy's country house. He has a hunting party there every August, and so they go there. And late into Having to Hoax, Diana made a bet that Jeremy would be married within the year, and so this book is about her trying to win that wager. But yeah, so I would say maybe a little less absurd than To Having to Hoax. There's no one pretending to be dying, which honestly was kind of a relief after writing all of To Have and to Hoax. But yeah, it's another Regency rom-com set in the same universe, so it's a lot of fun. And I'm in the middle of revisions on it right now, so I would not say I'm having fun with it at this precise moment.
Yeah,
but
it's not fun right now.
Overall, it has been really fun to write and really fun to sort of spend more time in this fictional universe and with these characters, and almost all the characters who are in To Have and to Hoax are also in this one, except for Violet's mother, which is, in my mind, a good thing because she's annoying, so she's not there.
Do you think you'll always write Regency romances, or do you have ideas for?
No, I mean, yeah, yes and no. I think I will always feel very comfortable in this space, and will write a lot more off and on. And for the next, like, for foreseeable future, that's kind of where I envision myself. But I have other ideas. Like, I might like to try writing a YA book again, which was kind of what I originally wanted to do, just because I'm a children's librarian. I really love kids and teen books. And I actually originally wanted to write fantasy. And so I have an idea currently for a fantasy rom-com that is just kind of like circling around in my head. Which
that's an up and coming genre. Yeah, jump on.
Yeah, I told my agent, and she was like, yes, write that. But I only have like a 2-sentence idea for it. So I'm like, well, we're gonna need to figure out a little bit more about this before I can. But, well,
that's great. You have some breadth and flexibility coming up. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna look forward to the next book. I love that. I was telling you off camera too. I love the authors who kind of write about the universe of characters, where characters walk on and off screen in each other's books. I really think that's fun. I've always intended to do it and have not yet, but I will someday figure out a way. And where can people find you online? Yeah,
so I'm on Twitter and Instagram. My handle on both of those is Martha B. Waters. So
Martha B. Waters. Martha B. Is that your nickname, Martha B?
No, it's Martha. My middle name is Best, which is my mom's maiden name. My real middle name is Best. But my mom called me Martha Bell.
Oh, that's sweet.
Martha B. Waters.
Martha B. Well, Martha B., it was so fun to have you. I'm getting comments in from people. I'm getting comments in from people that are saying, thank you, this was fun, and waving, and yeah. And again, shout out to Martha's Flyleaf bookstore, flyleaf.com, right? Or Flyleaf Books.
Flyleafbooks.com, I believe.
Flyleafbooks.com. It's on Facebook correctly. don't
I
trust.
believe you, don't worry.
Yeah, don't trust it coming out of my mouth. But if you know, if you want to support an indie and support Martha at the same time, that would be a great store. And we will see you next week. Bring your cocktails. Oh, we didn't cheers. Bring your cocktails next week for the bright side of going dark. So thank you again, Martha. Ching ching. Good night, everybody, and thank you for coming out. Take care.
Bye, guys.